name's Sean Kemp, and I'm excited to be talking to you about teaching choir like a pro, even if you're not a pro. A little bit about me. I am a veteran music teacher. I've been teaching for 22 years, although the vast majority of that time has been band and orchestra. I have taught at the elementary level and the middle school level and the high school level. And for most of my career, I have been my own feeder program for band or orchestra or both. And that was the case where I was teaching 4th grade through 12th grade for 11 years. And now I'm teaching 4th grade through 8th grade with a middle school choir also. So not in the bio, being terrified of teaching choir. So my current job that I have, I've been here for 6 years and I teach choir as part of that. And it turns out that I absolutely love it. I actually really enjoy choir. But I was not at all convinced that that was going to be the case. As a matter of fact, I was pretty much convinced that I would be terrible at teaching choir. And maybe some of you are in that same boat. Maybe you feel that same way. And I just wanted to let you know a little bit about my story. So when I first found out about this job that I have now, I wrote an email to the principal and I asked her if this was still available. And she said, yes. How do you feel about teaching choir? And so the next response that I wrote her was kind of like a sandwich. It was like the first paragraph was, I am very interested in this job. Second paragraph was, but you should really hire a real choir teacher. And then the third paragraph was, but I'm also very excited about the challenge that this presents. And lo and behold, they interviewed me, they hired me anyway, and here I am. Okay. So I am not an expert singer by any means. I consider myself to be an expert teacher, and I've adapted to teach choir well, or at least what I think is reasonably well, right? Now, there are certainly things that an expert singer would be able to bring to this job that I don't have. So I'm natively a brass player, grew up playing brass instruments. I'm really good at my secondary instruments as well, but I, other than college, have really not been in a vocal music class. I have not been in a choir before. There are certainly things that I don't understand about really great tone quality and producing great vowel shapes, and I'm learning about those things. There is no at all like substitution for becoming an expert on the instrument. And singers, their voice is their instrument. So I'm not an expert singer, and I just wanted to put that out there right now. Maybe some of you feel that same way. It actually hasn't prevented my choirs from sounding good though, and that's something that I'm excited about. I found that a lot of things are applicable to both band world or orchestra world and choir world. And in the words of one of my mentors from long ago, if it sounds good, it is good. So we're going to jump right in. So my school, just for some background, for some of the things that you hear me talking about in here, it's called Flagstaff Academy. This is a K-8 public charter school. It has a STEM focus, which I actually really love. The middle school, which is what the choir is part of, is one-to-one with Chromebooks. That's very handy for some of the tools that I'm going to talk about later on. My classroom board at the front of the room is a giant touchscreen computer running Windows. So that's also very useful. Okay, I started my journey for teaching choir right here with this particular book. I Know Sousa, Not Sopranos, a survival guide for the band director teaching choirs. It's a very short book. It's a very easy read. It's got some suggestions for some warm-ups. It's got some reassuring words. If you've never taught choir before and you're going to have to teach choir, I recommend that you should start there. It's a great read, super easy, certainly gave me some ideas about what I can do that I could then build upon later on. Okay, so we're going to talk about some things that you should think about before classes even begin. And this is the portion of it that's really applicable to both the band world or the orchestra world or the choir world. So I guess both instrumental and choral worlds. First thing we should think about is grading. And really, what are grades? Kind of like, what is the purpose of our grading scheme? Second thing we should talk about is, what is practice? Why do we do it? I mean, that seems like a kind of, silly thing to ask a bunch of musicians, But I think we do need to ask that question because it changes the way we approach it, depending on how we answer that question. And then the last thing is we need to educate parents. They need it too. They need to understand that we value what we're doing and that there's reasons that they should value it too. Okay, start with grades. Grades are representations of what students can display at a given time. They're like mileage markers on a road. That is the best way to think about it. A grade is just a little snapshot of what students can do at any given time. It's a measurement that we give to a skill that we are asking them to display for us. And we give them that measurement as a way to say, well, you are achieving this really well, but there's some other places that you can go with this. There's some improvements to be made. That's why we measure it. Grades do not stand alone, though. You can give somebody a grade and it can be absolutely meaningless to them. So a letter is not meaningful unless we attach something to it. A number is not meaningful unless we attach something to it. Grades do not motivate or propel students to grow unless you are attaching that to some feedback and presenting it as a pathway forward. Students do not represent a student's value or how you feel about them. And that last bit that I put on there, or how you feel about them, I think that's an important thing to think about too, because I certainly know some other teachers, I'll say, who tend to talk about grades sometimes as almost like they're punitive. And I think we need to be careful not to allow our frustration, which we do sometimes end up with being, we end up frustrated with students sometimes if they're not achieving what we think they can. But we need to be careful not to let that frustration kind of burrow its way into the way that we grade them. Just something to think about. Okay, grades should accurately represent the value you place on a task or skill. And I think that's something that we don't really pay enough attention to as educators. I'm not talking about you specifically, but I'm talking about kind of our whole team. I'm not convinced that we really do a good job of thinking about that. So for example, I know that a lot of teachers use a grading system that I'll call total points, which is however many points you end up assigning at the end of the quarter, that's what the grade is out of. And I think that the reason we do that is because, or the reason some of us do that is because it's convenient, because it is easier than thinking it through in advance. But the challenge with that is that you could end up giving more points for things that you actually value less. And that isn't necessarily going to reflect what you really want it to reflect in the end. So we'll talk about a way to avoid that. And then grades should also be attached to learning standards or the activities leading to those outcomes. Now, that probably sounds like common sense, but I think that that's an important thing to kind of put a marker on and say that grades should be attached to something that we are valuing. We'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit. Grades shouldn't be. They shouldn't be arbitrary. This is what happens if you are not attaching them to a grading standard, for example, or a skill that leads up to that standard. They should not be arbitrary grades. They shouldn't be automatic because that's arbitrary. And I'm going to say this, like if you are a teacher and you are giving everybody in your class an A, that's arbitrary. That is not really representative of what they can do, and it's not propelling their growth because it's not attached to anything that kind of matters. Grades shouldn't be thought of as deserved, and this is what I was kind of getting at earlier when I was talking about sometimes we let our frustrations kind of burrow into our grading policy, and I have absolutely heard teachers say things like, well, they got the grade they deserved. Well, no, they got the grade of the skill that they displayed is the way it should be. So we need to think about that in all of our classes, not just choir. Okay, so in a nutshell, grades are a measure or are measures of success for skills that matter to us. Thus, if it matters, it should be graded. It should be measured. That's probably a better word maybe than graded. I think of them interchangeably. Okay, let's talk about practice. Practice is necessary for all musical endeavors and should receive value, even in choir. And practice is a process that needs to be taught. Students do not know how to practice on their own. It is not an instinct that we can rely on. We can send students out to practice and we can say, go practice your part. And we have no idea what they're going to do in the practice room or in their home or in, the bus or wherever they're practicing. We have no idea what they're doing unless we're actually teaching them strategies to use for that. So that's something that I think is important. I think that we should teach strategies. We'll talk about that in a little bit too. Practice can be planned by teacher and student. I should have put by teacher and or student. Practice can be graded fairly to represent its value and its effectiveness. We can do both of those things. And practice can be an opportunity to receive feedback. So you've probably figured out by now, grades matter to me. It matters to me to give value to the things my students are doing in all of my classes. And it matters to me to provide value to practice through a grading system. And I try to be as fair as I can about that, but I want it to reflect what students can actually do too. And I think that that's a big part of my success teaching choir, as well as it is success teaching band. Okay, now let's get to that educating parents thing. Syllabus, yeah, you might use a syllabus. I don't actually call it a syllabus. I haven't called it a syllabus for a long time. I call it a parent's guide instead. And what I do when I'm introducing this to students, when I'm handing them a paper copy at the beginning of the year, I still do that in most of my classes, give them a paper copy. I tell them, we're going to kind of, hit the highlights of this, but this is really not for you. This is for your parents. This is so your parents understand what we're doing here and why it matters. I have my grading categories right up front, and you can see I've got some arrows. I've got formative, that's the practice categories. I've got the summative part, that's the assessment categories. I've got practice matters over on the right, pointing to the sentence. Important, the highest grade you can earn without practice guides is a 75%. So I've thought a lot about this, and you may come to different numbers. You may decide that something different works for you better. That's absolutely fine. We should all, trust our hearts on that. But the reason that I came to 75% is because a 75% in most grading schemes is kind of right in the middle of that C range, which traditionally has been something that we have considered should represent average. And in my mind, if you are not practicing at home, then, you're kind of in the mainstream of a lot of musicians. And I shouldn't say, like teacher musicians or professional musicians by any means. We know better than that. But I'm talking about school musicians. You know that there's quite a few of your students who aren't practicing at home, even if you ask them to do that. And I think that 75% is a fair grade to allow them to get. I don't think it should be a failing grade, because we do other things in music classes too, or at least I do other things. And so you can see there that practice guides are worth 25% of my final grade. Music theory assignments are worth 25% of my final grade. And the reason that those are equally important to me is because I want my students to be able to perform well. And so that's what practice is about. But I also want my students to be musically literate. And that's what the music theory assignments are about. I want them to be able to read. I want them to be able to notate. I want them to be able to understand conceptually the things that we are doing in music. And I consider those to be equally weighted. And then there's also preparation, 5% of the total grade. And then in the assessment categories, these are the summative things. We have performance tests, which are periodic. We have written tests, which would be anything that could be a written test that we need to do. Okay, you may have noticed that I had a preparation category. I don't grade for participation. And the reason I don't grade for participation is because participation is arbitrary. Participation is, well, let me rephrase that. It doesn't have to be arbitrary. Now, you could have an actual rubric for participation, and you could go down the line of all of your students every single day, and you could check off, okay, this particular student, they're participating by doing these things. This particular student, they're participating by doing those things. But in my experience and in my observation of other teachers, that's not really what we do. Preparation or participation grades usually end up being like ambiguous and ways that we ding students who are annoying us. Let that sink in for a little bit and think about it from an equity standpoint, right? So if we're grading on participation and the only way that we're grading on participation is, hey, I noticed that you're doing something that you're not supposed to be doing, therefore I am taking your points away. It's going to be anybody that we notice doing the thing, but not necessarily all the people who are actually doing the thing that they shouldn't be doing. And I think that's why it's arbitrary. So I try to take all of the guesswork out of my grading scheme and get rid of participation entirely. That's an evolution for me, to be honest. Like, I went most of my career grading for participation and not thinking anything was wrong with that. And I have come to a different conclusion now. By the way, the snip that you are seeing right here, you can read that if you want to. This is just an example from my parent guide, and I'm going to be putting that in the notes too. So you can download that and you can look at my parent guide, and you can steal the things you want. You can throw the whole thing away, whatever works for you on that. Okay, value practice from the very beginning. I tell parents in the parent guide that learning to play an instrument or sing well is impossible without working at home. And to reflect that, practicing is considered to be the same homework as a student would receive in any other class and will be graded each week. Now, I don't know about you, but I have definitely had conversations with parents before where they have asked me, or they've said something like, well, I'm not going to make my kid practice at home if they don't want to, because I don't want to ruin music for them. And my stock response to that is always, would you say the same thing if they were telling you that they wouldn't want to do the math homework or science homework? And I think the reason it's important to say that to parents is because it really forces them to frame the question as, is this an important thing or is this not an important thing? And I think it's easy for them to assume that it should be different. And I think we should challenge that view with them, because I think we all view music and music making and music education as very important. We need to actually make that argument with parents too. Okay, but here's a dilemma. This is something I still struggle with, to be honest. The dilemma of late practice. Okay, this is from my parent guide. Practicing has a cumulative impact over time. It does not improve your muscle control or neural connections if you save all of your practicing for the end of the quarter. Keep up with your practice time. Now, this used to say for me, it used to say that I would not accept late practice guides. But now that I'm using SmartMusic, I actually do accept late practice guides because they're verifiable, because I can tell that students have actually put in the work. And it still doesn't impact them the same way as if they had, practiced for 9 straight weeks, right? If they do all their practice in like 2 weeks, right before the concert, they're going to improve, but they're not going to improve as much because their brain doesn't have enough time to kind of rewire itself in the way that it needs to. But at the same time, I know that they have at least done something and they have at least improved a little bit. So I actually do give them credit for that now. That's also an evolution that I have come to. Okay, don't grade for concert attendance. And remember, this stuff is valid for choir or band or orchestra or anything. This is also something I've evolved on. Concert grades are either automatic or punitive. And let me say what I mean by that. Like, if everyone shows up at the concert, everyone gets an A for the concert. That's automatic, right? If Johnny doesn't show up for the concert and doesn't have a good excuse and is just not there, and you give them a 0 for that concert grade, that's punitive. That's not actually grading what they can do. That's grading based off of your annoyance that they aren't there at the performance. Now, we could argue that their absence at the performance impacts other students negatively, impacts the team negatively, and you'd be absolutely right. That's true. But it's still punitive in that case for them. Okay, the next part of this is if students can't or don't want to come to your concerts, that is a much bigger problem, and grades will not solve that problem. You will not get students to come to your concerts based off of threatening them with grades. Or if you do, they're going to resent you later, which is not going to be useful for you. Okay, something to think about. Okay, also in the parent guide, this is important for me. I teach in Colorado. We have state standards. We have benchmarks for those standards. I put those directly in the parent guide. So Colorado Music Standards, right up there in front. I'm trying to tell the parents, this is what we're doing. This is why we are doing it. Be specific with it. So I've got creation of music here. That's one of our standards in Colorado. And to meet the standard, students must, and then I've got a whole list of things that students need to be able to do. That tells the parents what we're going to be doing in class, tells them why we're going to be doing it in class, tells them what's important about what we're going to be doing in class, and honestly, holds me accountable for it too. Now I've told the parents I'm going to do it. Now I need to do it. Something to think about there too. All right. So now that's all the stuff that happened before. Now let's get to kind of the meat of the teaching part of it. First, you are better equipped than you think to teach choir. I was better equipped to teach choir than I thought. But here's some ways to help you out. First of all, we have efficient starts and transitions. These are going to help you with everything, but I'm going to give you some specific ways that can help with choir. Practice structure. What does it look like to ask students to practice? Teacher accommodations. I've got some things that I just cannot do as well as a native, brass player compared to a choir teacher. And so I've built some accommodations for myself. And then recruiting for choir too. We definitely want to build our programs up. Okay, frictionless starts. Gather all of your tabs and materials before class begins, right? I can remember a time when I was teaching band back at another school, and I had a fantastic administrator came in to observe me. I had a great lesson planned. It went off without a hitch, or so I thought. And I was using a lot of tech tools. And I was talking to him later, and he said, yeah, all this stuff you did was great, but you had some downtime when students were waiting for you to pull up whatever you were going to use next. And that has stuck with me ever since. Get it so you can, it's already ready to go. You just switch to it and boom, you are straight back to teaching. My personal philosophy on classroom management is not to give students time to kind of be unfocused, right? We just go straight from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. And we're very successful that way. So that's part of it. Create a routine. Stick with the routine, even when it's hard to stick with the routine. Begin singing right at the bell. That's what I do. Okay, not a pianist? Me neither. As a matter of fact, I'm a euphonium player, so I don't even have the benefit of having grown up using both of my hands to play an instrument, right? I've just got like my 4 valves up here in my right hand. And that is kind of a pain for me because when I'm trying to play piano, I can plunk things out with my right hand okay. I cannot add my left hand to save my life. I am not sure how I passed my piano proficiencies in college. Somehow I did, but that was a long time ago. So what I do instead is I have a speaker system in my room. I have a stereo receiver, and I connected a Bluetooth receiver to that. Now, if you've got one that's built in with a Bluetooth receiver, more power to you, that's great. Mine wasn't like that, so I bought a standalone add-on Bluetooth receiver that I can just attach my phone to, right? And then I've got playlists for our warm-up activities that we do. I use the Vocalize book by Andy Beck. My students absolutely adore these little songs that they sing. They ask me for specific ones. It's actually a lot of fun. We use those. And also warm-ups for changing voices, building healthy habits for middle school singers by Dan Anderson. We start off with a few warm-ups from that every single day. And the way that this works for me is as soon as the bell rings, I've already got the Bluetooth receiver connected to my phone. I've got the playlist open. And as soon as the bell rings, I say, welcome, let's sing. And we stand up and I walk around with my phone so I can be with the students. I can hear their voices. I can give individual feedback to students as they're doing their warm-ups. And we just go through a playlist, or, you know, I was going to say mess it up, but I will switch it up sometimes so that the students are getting different things that they're working on. So that's good. I also use something that I invented. Maybe somebody else has used this too. I don't know. I had never seen one before. So, you know, the Solfege hand symbols, I never could remember those, and they didn't make a lot of sense to me anyway. So I made something instead. I call it the Solfege stick. And the beauty of the Solfege stick is that it not only shows students the vertical distance and half steps and whole steps between the notes of the scale, but it's Velcro. So I can change out these syllables, and I can make it so that it's a minor. I can make a natural minor scale. I can make a harmonic minor scale. I can make a melodic minor scale, and we can practice all of those things using this. It's just got a little handle on the back that I added to it, so I can hold it up in front of the class, and I can just like point to the syllables as we go. And I have a little short video that I'm going to show you now of us actually using that. You won't see any students, but you'll see how it works in practice. So that's going to be next. Ready? Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, ti, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do, mi, sol, fa, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, ti, la, sol, do, sol, la, fa, mi, fa, sol, fa, mi, re, mi, do, mi, sol, mi, fa, re, do, ti, do. Okay. This is my daily sequence. This is what I'm doing every day in class. I'm starting with singing warm-ups. That's about 8 to 10 minutes. And I want to point out here that my classes are 46 minutes long most of the time. I do have an 80-minute class once a week. But, you know, 46-minute classes, if I'm spending 8 to 10 minutes of that doing warm-ups, that's a significant amount of time. And I'm doing that every day. And this is the best time to remind you that warm-up time is teaching time. Warm-up time when I'm doing these Andy Beck vocalize exercises, these are moments where I'm teaching students about vowel shape. I'm teaching them about projection. I'm teaching them about breathing. I'm teaching them about phrasing. I'm teaching them about blending and how to stand and all of those things. These are things that we repeatedly have to reteach through the year, and I'm doing that through these warm-up activities every single day. We start those right away at the bell. So bell rings, I've got my phone ready with my playlist ready to go, and it's connected via Bluetooth to my speaker system, and I just hit play and we go. I do change those up once in a while. It's not always the same warm-up set that I use, but I'm able to adjust it according to however or whatever the students need at that particular moment. And then after that, we're spending about 2 minutes with the Solfege stick. That is an important thing for getting them to recognize what it sounds like to move from one syllable to the next, one interval to the next. And then we're spending some time on sight reading or rhythm work. I'm doing sight reading exercises that take about 6 minutes. That is how long we have in the first reading part of the Colorado High School Activities Association sight reading part of the music festival sessions that we do. And we either do that or we do rhythm work during that time. It's about 6 to 8 minutes. And then for the last part of the class period, I'm working on 2 concert selections, usually about 13 to 15 minutes each. And I usually have more than 2 concert selections that I'm working with the students, but I'm only choosing 2 of those for that particular rehearsal. Okay, this I think is really important. We need to teach students how to practice. We need to teach them to identify the key. We need to teach them to find the problem spots. We need to teach students how to count so that they can figure things out on their own. We need to teach them to be able to read note names and convert that into solfege based off of the key. We need to teach them to look for patterns. These are the same strategies that work for teaching sight reading. And you know, the thing is, like, I've been teaching these practice strategies for a long time, but I haven't realized that they're the same as sight reading until like I was putting together this presentation, and I'm like, wow, this is what I do all the time. And I just, you know, never thought about it in terms of sight reading. All of this stuff is really geared towards teaching students to be free. We want them to be free. We want them to leave our care and be able to do amazing things without us around. We don't want them to have somebody to sing the part to them so that they can figure that out. We want them to be able to get a starting pitch and be able to go. Same thing with band. Choir works the same way. It's a little harder though, because, you know, with band, you can put down the right fingering and you can, you know, make your embouchure the right shape and firmness, and you can blow the right air pressure, and you can get a sound that's at least close to being right. May not be in tune, but it's at least close to being right. Singing is more complicated than that. They don't have any buttons to push that get them at least close. So something to think about there too. Okay, start early with teaching those practice strategies. Now, this is something that I'm going to just digress a little bit. This is beginning band for me. I put these practice strategies, I actually tape them on my beginning band students' books so that when they are at home, they are actually able to see it and able to remind themselves. And then when we're learning a new little song out of their book in class, I will say, okay, well, you know, I think we can do better at that. What are our practice strategies? And I'll actually ask that on a regular basis, almost every day. What's the first practice strategy? Okay, great. Where should we look in this music? Great. All right, well, now that we found it, let's count it. Let's say the note names. Let's do that. So not only am I telling them to do this, but we are actually doing it in class. And so I'm taking my cue from them on what we should work on in class. And I think that helps them learn how to figure out how to practice. Okay, I use SmartMusic because I value practice. It teaches students to practice for accuracy. It teaches students that performance skills can be increased with practice. It enhances my ability to understand student needs. Okay, that last bit is something that you might not think about. But the beauty of SmartMusic is I can assign something that I think that they need to work on, and then I can listen to that assignment later, and then I can hear the things that I didn't realize they were going to struggle with, and then I can address those things. So it's very useful for that. I use SmartMusic in choir. I use SmartMusic in band. It works very well for both situations if you are using it appropriately. SmartMusic, here's the not why. Here's the why you shouldn't, or, you know, a reason not to use it. That's really not the right way to put it. Not why is the best way. This is a tool. It is not a replacement for my involvement. It does not save me time. Okay, so seriously, SmartMusic does not save me time. I actually spend more time grading probably because of using SmartMusic than I would without using it. But it also allows me to gain an insight into students' abilities that I would not have otherwise. So I really like it for that. All right, I think this is important. The practice feedback loop. All right, so this starts off with score study. So before you've assigned anything, you're looking at the score, you're trying to predict what students are going to have trouble with. And then you assign those challenges. That's where it says number 2 down there. And then you listen and you provide feedback for refinement. And then you reassign with a new focus. Maybe it's the same section of music, but you heard what they did, and now you're going to suggest a new focus for them to work on. And then you're going to listen again and provide that refined feedback. And then you can keep going through that same way, that same sequence, or I put in a box down there, heard something in class, something that needs to be improved, assign that to them so that they can work on it and put that into the loop. It works really, really well when you use it that way. All right, here's how you set them up for success. For choir, I have an intermediate band, which is the bridge between my elementary music program, my elementary band program, and my kind of audition-only middle school group. For choir and that group, I assign them 2 to 3 selections per week on SmartMusic. These are short selections. I don't assign more than 8 measures at a time. So they'll have 3, 8 measures sections of music to work on. I will set the tolerance to easy or lenient. Easy is the best way to do it for choir. We'll talk about that in a little bit too. For advanced band, for my audition only group, I assign 3 to 4 per week, and I use the average tolerance for them because they've already improved enough that they can get to that next level. One of those advanced band assignments that I do per week, by the way, is one of those 4 is always a sight reading assignment. And I give them 45 seconds to look it over, and then it automatically counts them off and they have to play it. And it doesn't count against them. We'll talk about that in a bit. Okay, so setting students up for success when you make the assignment. This is one of the pieces that I was recently doing with choir. For choir, I always check the box for metronome. I always check the box for my part. And what I do for choir is I instruct the students to use headphones. I want them to sing with their part in their ear. I want them to have something to match. That's absolutely critical because we know that especially in middle school, even if you give them a starting note, their interval competency is not going to be as great as it probably needs to be. So this is a great way for them to hear it just like they were singing next to somebody who was strong on their part, and they can match that while they're singing. I also set it up for easy tolerance. This is where you would do that. And that helps choir a lot. It helps them be successful. We want them to feel like they're doing well. I post these in Google Classroom. We are a Google school, so I post it in Google Classroom. I call it It's Time to Practice. I put the link for SmartMusic in there. I just tell them SmartMusic assignments are waiting for you. They're due at the end of the day on Friday, blah, 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 right? And then I put a feedback anchor in there. And this is important for Google Classroom because, well, I like to give feedback to students, but Google Classroom won't let you type in the feedback box unless there's an actual document attached to the assignment. So I just call it feedback anchor. The students don't write anything in it. They never add anything to that document, but it just gives me that box to enter the feedback in. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, if you've used SmartMusic before, but SmartMusic has also a feedback function. Why aren't you using that? And the truth is, my students never, ever, ever look at their feedback in SmartMusic. It doesn't force them to find it. They have to go back and reopen that assignment that's already been graded to find out if there's feedback and to read what it says. This allows me to do, feedback for all 3 of their assignments. If they've had 3 in a week, allows me to do all 3 at the same time. And it sends them a notification that they have something to look at. And so I find it better to do it that way. Why should we provide feedback if students aren't going to look at it in the first place, right? We need to get that to them. So after the due date, first thing that's important is you should listen. Don't let SmartMusic be something that you are just assigning and then letting the computer grade, and then you are done with it and you enter it in the grade book. That's not the best way for your students. That's not going to propel their growth as much. So you listen, you adjust scores, because honestly, quite often, even if it's set on easy, there are times when they get robbed a little bit, and you should give them a good score. You should provide direct feedback in the way that I was talking about. You should also, or at least I do, I export those grades as a spreadsheet. And I take all of those grades for the week and I average them together into one score. So they get one practice guide grade per week. Now remember, practice guides as a whole bucket of grades are 25% of their total grade. But I give them one grade per week, even though they've had 3 things to work on. I just take their scores, average them together, give them whatever that score happens to be. I like doing it that way because that way they are seeing the overall impact of their grade or of their practice instead of focusing on that one grade that might have been lower than they wanted it to be. Also, I think this is important. I adjust grades so that students receive a minimum of 50%. And the truth is, if it's on easy, they should be able to surpass 50% anyway. But for my students that are using average tolerance, sometimes that doesn't work. Or, honestly, sometimes kids will turn in things that are just completely and totally wrong. But even when they do that, I still give them a minimum of 50% for that particular assignment, and then I average it with the others. And the reason I do that is because I don't want practice to feel punitive to them. I want practice to feel like something that they are at least being acknowledged for their effort for. Certainly, I want them to do as well as they can. I'm frequently talking to them about using their sincere best effort. That's a phrase that I use a lot in class. But sometimes they're using their sincere best effort and it's still not where it needs to be. And that's why I give them a minimum of 50%. That's just my philosophy on that. Okay, no penalty risks. So remember, I was talking about the sight reading component that I do for advanced band students. I give them one sight reading assignment per week. So no matter what the score is, it doesn't go into the average. I do not grade them for their sight reading at all, unless they don't do it. If they don't do it, if there's a 0 there for that particular assignment, if they didn't even try it, then I'll put that 0 in the average. And then that becomes you should have done this and it hurt your grade because you didn't do this. But if they're doing it, if they're practicing sight reading, like you can probably remember yourself practicing sight reading and not being always as successful as you would like to be. We want them to practice it. We don't want them to dread it. So it doesn't count against them when I do that. Okay, here's an example of some of the feedback that I do. This is actual feedback that I gave to a particular student. And I'm just telling her, increased your scores a bit for the Velvet Shoes and Song of Myself assignments. It sounds like you're having trouble singing long notes for their full value. Some are stopping 1 or 2 beats too soon. Others get really wavy at the end, like you're trying to force out too little air. Be sure to fill your lungs all the way when you breathe. Small breaths are your enemy as a singer. So this is a good example of feedback that I give. I want them to know that I'm listening. I want them to know when I do increase their grades, that I did increase their grades, but I also want them to know what they're working on or what they need to work on. One of the things that I find myself saying frequently after I listen to SmartMusic assignments is don't whisper sing. So sometimes when students are singing or playing at home, I think they're self-conscious about it and they try to use less air because they don't want to be noticed as much by people around them. And that's something that I try to fight. I think that would be happening if I didn't use SmartMusic and I would just never know about it. But now that I do, I can help them through that concept. Consider this though. Singers are their instrument. They can blame themselves and harshly when they're wrong, right? Actively, repeatedly teach that singing is a skill that can grow. It is not something that is built in. We want to fight this idea that talent is something that you're either born with or you're not, or that ability is something that you're either born with or not. Even when we have talent, we can increase it. Even if we're not the most talented, we can improve. And we need to address that with students because they very much will try to have a fixed mindset about that. And that's not going to be in their best interest. It's especially important to have this conversation with choir because band students, maybe you know this, you probably do, they can and frequently do blame their instruments when they make a mistake. I don't know if you've ever seen a flute player like make a mistake and then put down their flute and start twisting the head joint, like that had something to do with their mistake, right? I've seen that so many times in my career. They can externalize their feelings of being wrong Choir members can't. So we need to address that, and we need to talk about it with them pretty often. Another challenge for using SmartMusic is potentially hearing the wrong octave in their ears. So say you've got a student who has a changing voice, he's a male and his voice is dropping, and you only have one choir and he's singing a 2-part song. It's basically soprano alto, and you're trying to have him sing down the octave. So, in the parts that he can sing down the octave where it makes sense, right? But if he's not able to hear that octave being higher and then convert that into the octave that he needs to sing it in his brain, that can be a challenge. So I'd suggest working on octaves with your students. And then also male voices, sometimes they just have a limited range period. Sometimes they're just missing notes. So sometimes you might need to just tell that student, hey, I'm going to listen to you sing this part. Here's how I want you to sing it. Leave this note out while you're doing it. But know that I'm going to listen to it and I'm going to adjust the grade. No matter what it says, I'm going to adjust the grade. And by the way, I say that for percussionists too, because, SmartMusic is a wonderful tool in a lot of ways, but it's still not very good for percussion. And I always tell my percussionists, I'm going to listen to it. I'm going to override whatever grade is there and give you what you really should have for that. So use your sincere best effort, listen to your recording, make sure you're not missing anything obvious, but then trust me to fix it on the back end. So have that conversation with your male voices too when they are struggling. How much time do I spend grading this? Well, at the beginning of the year, quite a bit, actually. And I know that's not what people like to hear, but it's true. I mean, we need to provide the students with the feedback that's going to make them better. And it takes a long time sometimes to do that. I spend at least 2.5 hours per week listening to every recording at the beginning of the school year and making adjustments and doing feedback. Later on, once they know that I'm going to listen to their assignments, I'm going to provide them feedback and that it's valuable. Later on, I will choose one selection per week and I will listen to that and I'll kind of spot check the others, right? And I will give them written feedback for that. And my personal rule is any grade below 80%, no matter what, I'm always going to listen to that. And I'm always going to provide feedback for that. And I'm always going to go ahead and change that grade if necessary. But if it's above 80% and we're, halfway through the year or at least through the first quarter or so, then I'm going to provide them feedback on the one thing, and that cuts down on some of the time that I spend grading, but also still provides them the feedback that they can use to get better. Here's another thing that you could do. I used this with band students 2 weeks before the concert. I've been trying to think of a way that I can use this with choir students too. So maybe you can help me think this through and you can contact me and figure it out. This is something that I do when I know that my students have a better idea of what they need to fix than I do. At the beginning of the concert cycle, that's not true. At the beginning of the concert cycle, I know what they need to work on. I'm doing that score study. I'm focusing on what they need. But towards the end of the concert cycle, when we're getting close to that concert, I'm going to ask the students to come up with their own plan. And I have 4 goals for them to make, and they have to tell me what the song is, what measures in the song. I want these to be specific. I limit them to 8 measures. Sometimes kids will say, well, what if I just need to practice the whole song? And I'll say, tough. That's not specific enough. Find the things you really need to work on. And then they're going to just put a check mark next to all the things that they plan to make better. And then they're going to put a check mark next to which days are you actually going to do this on? And then you're going to tell me, why is this an important goal for this piece of music? I make kids write complete sentences for this. It's great. And then the last one, worth the most points. Each one of these goals is worth 25 points, but the most points, 20 of that's were you successful? If not, why not? And I make them fill this out in class on Fridays. When we first start doing these practice plans, I actually make students fill these out in class on the previous Friday, come up with your plan. We'll take 10 or 15 minutes of class time and actually have them write out their plan, and then they put it in their folder, and then we collect them the next week. I think this is a great way for reinforcing that concept of you can make your practice better if you have a plan for doing it. I wish I had been taught to practice like that when I was a kid. Okay, but if you're going to use this for choir, and this is something I'm struggling with right now, students will need at a minimum a full-length SmartMusic assignment for the song, whatever song they're working on, right? And you can set that to practice time, or you can give them sheet music and some way to produce a starting pitch. I think that's harder because we know that unless we've been doing a lot of interval work in the classroom, students are probably going to struggle with staying on pitch the way they need to if they can't hear it with somebody else, at least at first. So I think that's why it would be useful to assign it like a complete song assignment and just let them choose the part of it that they want to work on. And then they can choose not to turn that into you. As long as you make that an assignment for them, they can access it and they can listen and they can do the thing that they've said that they're going to do. They also need note reading and solfege skills. I hope that we're teaching those things anyway, but they have to be good at those things if they can't hear the parts in the background. Okay, let's talk about recruiting. This has become like the most favorite thing for my choir students to do. I teach at a K-8 school, and so there's lots of classrooms that we can go visit. And so about a week before our concerts, I will send an email to the whole staff of the school and I'll say, hey, we're going to do a choir tour. Let me know if you are interested in us coming to sing to your classroom. Feel no pressure to do this, but we're available if you'd like us to come sing. And then I put a Google form in there and have them fill out a Google form for telling me like what room they're in, what time they would like us to come. That's important. And then I put together a schedule and we go sing. And these are 5-minute intervals. And I usually do this on the block period that happens to be the same day as our concert for my choirs. And I will take this as an opportunity to run through all the songs for them throughout, for the concert so that they're really, really, really comfortable with that. But I will also use it as an opportunity to recruit because we're going to sing for these elementary kids. And it's amazing watching their faces light up when we surround the classroom. And I'll just put a Bluetooth speaker right in the middle of it. And I've got the song accompaniment on my phone. I'll buy the accompaniment CDs because I'm certainly not a pianist, right? So I'll buy those accompaniment CDs and I will put that MP3 on my phone and we'll just take that Bluetooth speaker to all those classrooms. We have 5-minute intervals. So it's literally just 5 minutes getting from one class and singing to the next class and singing to the next class. And it is great. It has really helped my numbers. I have more students signed up for choir for next year than I've ever had before. And that is really exciting to be able to do. Here's another thing that you can do. You can teach with concert videos. So for me, the teaching really never ends. I'm teaching all the time. You can teach with concert videos by, the day after the concert, we do a debrief, we watch the concert video, but I make the students do a pretty involved concert self-evaluation form that I've also linked in the clinic notes. So you can make a copy of it, you can use it however you want. It's a Google form. And I keep it like all that data forever. It just goes into a giant spreadsheet. I ask the students at the end of it, are there any things that you want me to know about this concert cycle? And I always read those. And sometimes students will say things that I feel like I should respond to. And so I'll send them an email and I will respond to those things, let them know that I'm really, really paying attention. But this has been a great way to kind of bring everything full circle at the end of the concert cycle and launch us into the next thing. And I found out that my students in all of my ensembles actually are really, really perceptive when we start using this. So that works well. But sometimes we do recordings before the concert. And when we're doing that, I love to use real world rubrics. Now, I take my students to choir festivals every year, at least pre-COVID. I was taking them every year. And we just resumed it this year. Just a few weeks ago, we went and we did a choir festival in Colorado. And I'm always telling the students, these are not competitions. These are times when we can go and we can sing for judges who are experts at choral music, and they are going to compare us against their idea of what a great middle school choir sounds like. and they're going to provide us feedback on how to get there. And they're going to use this rubric, and I teach the students to use the rubric. I teach that to them in advance, not because I want to increase our score, but because the rubric is well designed. The rubric is designed to show students what they can improve and what really makes up a good choral performance. When I'm teaching this, though, I don't emphasize those words that you see at the top. I don't emphasize the rating. I don't emphasize superior or excellence or good. I talk about that thing that I put the red box around. Consistently demonstrates proper, frequently demonstrates proper. And I put percentages on those when I'm talking to students. Like, these are the things that we can do to improve. And this is how we can make it better. We can listen, we can rate ourselves, and now we know what we can do better next time. It just forces them to think about it in a different way. And this is an actual example of a student filling out an adjudication form earlier this year for this exercise that I do with them. And I love it. It's a great way of teaching them the important things that they should be listening to, the things that are elements of a great choral performance. So I find this very useful. You can also do this in band. I have done this before in band as well, and it works out just as well. It gives the students something concrete to think about while they're preparing for great performances, whether it's for a festival or a concert, no matter what. Okay, and the last thing is, don't forget to have fun. I don't know how this happened or why this happened, but years ago, my choir students decided that they are going to start memorializing things that I say in class. And I do sometimes say some pretty ridiculous things in class, and they decided that they were just going to start writing those on sticky notes, and they're going to put them on the board. And so pretty much all of them have a pad of sticky notes now that they just bring to class, and they write down things that I say, and they go and they, like, while we're rehearsing, just go stick it to the board, and then we carry on, and then I read it later, right? And so these are some examples of that, like no slidey bad, right? So we don't want to slide between pitches. We want to make sure each one of those pitches is distinct. That's one of the things we're talking about, right? I don't want their heads to split by going right? So I'm trying to get them to have clear diction all the time. And that is obviously something that I'm emphasizing, but sometimes it goes too far. And sometimes they make such a big deal about that it's like a laser going into the head of the listener. So we don't want that, right? I've got one that says, great, now never do that again, right? So there are times when I ask them to intentionally sing things wrong just so that they can experience that. Great, never do that again. And then theory work. This is a lot. I know, I can see the brains melting out of your heads, right? That's one of the things I said. I did not put the follow-up to that, which was, it's okay, we'll sell the brains on the black market, it'll be fine, right? So those are some of the silly things that I say. Okay, that's it. I hope that this was useful for you. It's been fun for me to present it to you and talk about it. I love choir. I never would have thought that that would be true, but I absolutely love it. I hope that you end up loving it too, if you don't already. Don't forget, be equitable, be intentional, be inspiring, teach students to be awesome, and reach out to me if you would like to have a conversation about any of this, or if you have suggestions for me. I will be happy to listen and talk to you about all of that stuff. So, thank you.